Hello, everybody, and it's me again, Fee, or White Zulu, and here's another chapter from my autobiography of the same name. I hope you all had an amazing Christmas, and yes, I will be wishing you a happy new year. By the time this one comes out, it will be just on New Year's Eve, I think. So enjoy the beginning of 2023, if you can believe it. We are in another year has gone by, which staggers me. However, this is chapter 17, Polo season. One late autumn morning, I woke early and lay in bed, watching the curtains billow gently in the warm breeze, which promised another baking hot day. I could hear the chorister robin calling out his repertoire of mimicked bird songs. He could imitate so many of them so exactly that it was often impossible to tell it was him. The only giveaway being that the call was coming from the depths of the hydrangea shrub just under my window. He could even copy to a T the baby-crowned eagle who sat in his nest in the giant yellowwood tree in the bush and called peewit, peewit, peewit all through the summer to his parents, who circled above the valley looking for vervet monkeys to feed him with. The robin made a few sad Diederik cuckoo calls and then fell silent. Suddenly remembered why I was so excited. I was going to spend the morning with Toto, helping him with the polo ponies. I jumped out of bed and pulled on my jeans and a t-shirt, splashed a handful of water over my face in the end bathroom, and ran out of the back door and straight over to the stables. Toto had all the saddles out already on the long hitching rail, 7 of them, and he was applying saddle soap, his shadow against the whitewashed stable wall making him look like a giant in the early morning sun. There was a heap of bridles lying in the grass, the bits soaking in an enamel basin of warm water to loosen the chewed grass stuck to the metal. Toto was only about a foot taller than I, and I was 7. He was a closer and had come to the farm as a boy of 10. Toto lived in a cluster of huts in the Transkei, overlooking the big flat polo ground, and his father worked there, mowing the grass to keep it short and looking after the red and white painted wicker goal posts during the summer months when it was too hot to play polo. Toto was fascinated by the tournaments, and as soon as he was able to walk, used to creep away to watch Abelungu racing their ponies about, hitting such a tiny white ball with long sticks. When he was 10, after hanging around with the grooms who came from all over the country, he decided that he wanted to be a horseboy. After one particular match, he climbed inside one of the big tack duffel bags and waited for it to be loaded onto the train back to Nottingham Road. It was only after the tack had reached our farm, along with the ponies, that he finally revealed himself by climbing out, to astonished shouts of "Hi, Ubanilo," Who is this? From the farm boys unloading the truck. Toto refused to tell anybody where he came from and just repeated stout-heartedly to all questions, "I want to be a polo boy." Dad shrugged and let him stay, saying, "Xhosas make good horsemen. Zulus are better at watching cattle." He was quite right about Toto. Through malnutrition in poverty-stricken Transkei, the boy had suffered from rickets as a baby and was always going to be slightly built. He never grew from his 10-year-old height, so he had the proportions of a jockey. Extremely strong, he was a natural rider, and there wasn't a horse that would back him off, could back him off. Even being a Xhosa didn't seem to matter, and he settled into farm life with our Zulus with no trouble at all. "Come," Joe said to me, "I've saddled up Pat and Squib. We must fetch the polo ponies from the field above the bush." I swung myself into the saddle and kicked Squib into a reluctant canter as I followed Toto's dust down the road. The ponies all raised their heads as we came into sight, whinnying at greeting, and from out of the long grass and over the horizon they began to assemble around us. There was Ronald, Dad's favourite, a strawberry roan gelding. His coat always had a pink tinge to it, and he had won the South African National Polo Pony of the Year award 2 years in a row. And Prince, a chestnut gelding with a white blaze on his face, had come a close runner-up to that award on more than one occasion. There was Mac, a bay gelding with a good temperament, and then there was Chanter. Chanter was a grey mare who flattened her ears and kicked viciously out at any other horse within reach. This made her very difficult to ride, and we had to tie a red bow onto her tail as a warning to everybody else at gymkhanas. But she was a brilliant polo pony, and Dad only kept her for that reason. "She's got a savage temper, but she stops and turns on a tikkie," he said about her. There was Phantom, another grey. Toto and I thought he was called Fanta, after the lurid orange drink we'd seen advertised on a hoarding at Houston's store. And Klondike, a mean-tempered horse who only ever went backwards and didn't stay with us for very long. He was almost pitch black and moved into reverse at the drop of a hat, and Dad sold him to one of his neighbours. He rounded up the herd and accompanied them at a brisk jog back along the road to the stables, their fat grass bellies swaying from side to side. Ears pricked forward, they trotted up to the thatched building and milled around the doorway. By the time we'd climbed off our ponies, they were all in their stalls, standing there patiently, waiting for their scoop of oats and bran. Each pony chose the same stall every winter season, and the pecking order never varied. They hung their heads over the half doors, nickering expectantly as we mixed their feed. They blew and snorted into their mangers while we dished out each helping of delicious-smelling warm mash. I loved the smell of their food and dipped my grubby finger into the mixture only to be disappointed to find myself chewing on tasteless chaff. Otto brought each pony clip-clopping one by one out into the sunshine again, tethering them by their halters to the hitching rail, and brushed their coats to a gloss, removing as much dust and grass seeds as he could, until they all stood gleaming in the hot midday sun. Then he plugged the electric clippers into a light bulb socket which hung down from the stable wall for that purpose, and shaved them all. Ronald gradually turned pinker as his hair fell to the ground around his feet, and Prince's shiny golden chestnut coat became a peculiar pale orange suede-like texture. Tanta kicked out and fussed, as she always did, and Toto dodged her lashing hooves and ducked when she flattened her ears, arched her neck, and snapped savagely at him with her big yellow teeth as he worked the clippers over her. He cut their shaggy manes short with sheep shears, so they all stood up like soft punk brushes. And we both worked on trimming their tails in order to be easy to tie up into a knot for polo matches. The next day, the farrier, a tanned, stocky young white man, arrived in his battered white bakkie to shoe all the ponies before the polo season started in the cooler, dry winter. We had a small homemade iron forge and full-sized anvil in the tin-roofed shelter at the back of the garage, which served as a workshop, and I spent the morning standing, holding the waiting ponies' halters and watching as the farrier quickly prized off the old shoe, nails and all, briskly filed the hoof, and then placed the new red-hot iron shoe there. There was a lot of hissing and acrid grey smoke coiled up as the heated metal set into the horn of the hoof, and then the farrier would take it off again to hammer it into the perfect shape before he nailed the finished shoe on with expert ease. It was wonderful to watch, and the ponies stood there patiently, as they did every year before the polo season, apparently resigned to the procedure. Every day, through the winter season, Toto brought all 6 ponies to the back gate, 2 of them saddled and the rest on bridles with lead reins, and I ran out to meet him. I mounted Ronald and led Prince and Mac. Toto had the difficult ones. He rode Phantom and led Chanter and Klondike on long reins so they wouldn't fight with each other, and off we went. We kept to a brisk walk, only trotting them up the hills for the first few days so they could sweat off their summer grass bellies and gradually build up fitness. To amuse ourselves, Toto asked me to teach him English songs, and as the only one I knew was the first verse of Bar Bar Black Sheep, we both sang it lustily as we jogged along and chorused, yes sir, flea bags full, at the tops of our voices. An hour or so's hacking over the farm, we took them up to Dad's practice ground and waited for him to arrive, bumping over the veldt in the Land Rover with another saddle, 3 polo sticks and a couple of balls in the back. Then the 3 of us practiced, sometimes 4 if Shorty came along, playing up and down the grassy polo ground, hitting the ball along the ground with our sticks and weaving our ponies around each other. We galloped and pulled them to an abrupt halt so that they almost sat on their haunches, new shoes skidding on the dusty mown late summer grass, turned them and raced off to the other side, winding our sticks round and round, windmilling them by the straps, and reaching under the ponies' necks to hit a shot across the field. By the time we'd finished, they were sweating to a foamy lather around their leather trappings, and their sides heaved as they gasped for air. It was almost as exciting playing in a real polo match, but our only spectators were the baboons sitting up in the rocky krantz on the mountain behind us, and an occasional cluster of passers-by, usually Zulu women with their children, on their way down the district road to the nuns' convent. They stood or sat on the sandy bank at a safe distance and exclaimed, "How?" now and again as one of us galloped along the field, hitting the ball with a loud crack and whirling our mallet. Most of them knew Dad and me, but when strangers were told I was a girl, there were clicks of amazement. With my short hair and jeans, riding at full tilt, my bare feet curled around the stirrups, I must have been an odd sight to them. The ponies loved it. There was lots of snorting. They tossed their heads till their bits jingled, and foam flecks flew while they waited for their turn. As soon as I dismounted to give one a breather, the next pony surged forward, eager to join the fray on the field. Dad rode with very light hands and the gentlest types of bit, like simple thick snaffles, which are the kindest available. He never used curb chains or straight bits, so all the polo ponies' mouths were beautifully soft. He insisted that we rode the same way, and it made for very pleasant polo, as they were so responsive, and we didn't have to yank them around. The slightest tug on the reins brought them to an immediate stop, and a light nudge in the flanks sent them bounding forward at a gallop. Shorty, Toto, my sisters, and I all rode, with the reins balanced lightly in the left hand, except with my own Basutu pony, Squib, of course. Everybody refused to ride him at all, and the grooms only if they absolutely had to. Even if he was being led, he stretched his hairy, mutinous chin out and dragged his feet reluctantly. As the sun started to dip towards the hills, we walked the ponies home at a sedate pace, stopping at the river where they lowered their muzzles to the cool water, taking in long draughts to quench their thirst. When we got home, I jumped off at the back gate to run to the house, skidding in the back door for my bath and supper in the nursery, and Toto and Shorty took the ponies on to their stable, where they rubbed them down with wisps of hay and preparing their evening feed of scalded oats and bran. The horses were trekked to the closer tournaments, or taken in a horse box to those further away. and by goods train to the more remote places such as Lusikisiki and Gingindlovu on the Zululand north coast, or Matatiele and Kokstad in East Griqualand. When the ponies and grooms were sent ahead by rail, the ponies, with all their tack in big khaki duffel bags, would be loaded into a stock wagon at Nottingham Road Station by Shorty and another groom, Petrus, and they spent the night travelling slowly on the milk train to Matatiele or Kokstad, or wherever it was they were going. We went in the car the next day and caught up with them at the polo grounds. Grandpa, his brother Ken, now this is Dad's father, Alan Ross, his brother Ken and Dad's uncle Hugh Brown, Molly, Dad's mother's brother, and older son of W.G. Brown, dominated South African polo between the First and Second World Wars, with Grandpa still holding the very highest handicap of 7 at the age of 47. These few but formidable players could easily have been among the best in the world when given the opportunity to find teams from other countries to play against. On page 15 of the History of Polo in South Africa, a book written by 2 polo-playing Mackenzie cousins of Dad's, there is a report about His Royal Highness Edward, Prince of Wales, coming out on a royal visit to South Africa in 1925, before he became involved with Wallace Simpson and had to abdicate. The Prince was a polo aficionado and a good player, and when, in Durban, he watched an exhibition match put on by some of our best players, he expressed enormous interest in having a game himself, and so it was arranged. Because the Prince hadn't brought out any of his own players, and this was long before air travel, it was decided that he would pick 3 players from the best on offer from the South African squad to be in his team. After much careful consideration, and by watching them play in his presence, he finally chose my grandfather, Alan Ross, a 7 handicap, as his number 3 player, because he held the highest handicap and was deemed the best player in the country. He also picked Jack Mackenzie, Grandpa's cousin, and a Mr. S.T. Amos. Ken Ross, Grandpa's brother, another outstandingly excellent player, was picked as reserve. Then, when one of the pre-selected ponies became unavailable, the Prince of Wales rode on one of Grandpa's. They played against the Carkloof team, the reigning champions, consisting of Jack Otto, G. Norton, Eric Green, and Jack Shaw, whose grandchildren I used to play with at polo tournaments. And so in July 1925, with great fanfare and publicity, the polo match was held at the Durban Polo Club, showcasing South Africa's best players to a massive crowd. The Prince's team won this illustrious tournament, thanks to him and Grandpa scoring very difficult shots and enough goals to put them well in front. International polo tournament against Argentina. In September 1933, a South African polo team was invited to Argentina to play a series of international tours against their equally excellent players. This was the first time the South African players had had the opportunity to play abroad. Argentinians had offered to pay for shipping the horses, but due to lack of available space on the only vessel that would sail directly to Argentina, the South African team had to very reluctantly leave their own ponies behind and instead borrow mounts offered by the Argentinians. Playing on strange ponies had a huge impact on the outcome of all the matches they played. According to my great-uncle Hugh, who was the captain and team manager, the Argentinian ponies were much bigger than the average South African pony, were schooled in an entirely different manner, and trained to a different type of polo from ours. Another player, Ian Gibson, reported, "The only thing they are good at is pulling, and by Jove, they go and they don't stop." Instead of the original offer of 40 ponies, they found that there were a great deal less mounts available, and none of them up to the high standard of schooling the South African ponies offered. In a newspaper report, one South African remarked that the Argentinian players must be exceptional horsemen to be able to play on those ponies, considering their total lack of finish. To add to their problems, all but a few of the borrowed ponies were very green, and this was their first season. Polo in Argentina is played at a much faster pace than in South Africa, and none of the ponies recognized any heel work. One heel meant the same as two heels to them, and stirrups were set far longer, noticeably changing the balance of the rider. Argentinian horsemen held their reins high up, almost under their chins, and the touring side had to rapidly adjust their ways to suit those of their mounts, leaving them at a distinct disadvantage as how to manage the reins up in the air, have no response to heels for maneuvering, keep the new center of gravity, and to top it all, readjust the use of the stick by wielding it far higher as it had to clear the reins. The tour started off badly for South Africa, with a series of injuries to players. The first was given an overfed mount, which should never have been used at all, and at the first turn it bucked its rider off, leaving him with an injured shoulder and out of play for 2 weeks. "I was the next victim," said Grandpa. "I was racing after an opponent, and trying to hook his stick when my pony stopped dead. I went straight over his head, landing on my back. He damaged a bone in his back and was out for the rest of the tour. Unfortunately, Grandpa had his fall during a friendly match before he was able to play in Springbok colours, and sadly never had the opportunity to do so, which was a great blow to him. A third victim's horse rolled over him, leaving him concussed for 5 days, And then the fourth South African player's horse was knocked over and fell on top of him. By now, the South African team had only 3 fit players left, and the tour had barely started. Uncle Hugh finally had to resort to reinstating Ernest Green, the first player to be injured, and in spite of his shoulder still strapped up, the touring side, with just 4 players, managed to win all their matches and emerged the victors of what could have been a disastrous trip. After that resounding triumph, Grandpa and his brother carried on playing inter-provincial polo for a few more years before they both retired from competitive games altogether and resorted to semi-retirement and playing the odd friendly match, often to make up numbers. The Second World War put a stop to any more international tournaments, and as all the younger players had enlisted, putting their ponies out to grass or into the hands of sons who were still schoolboys and would become the next generation of superb, skilled and courageous players. Final blow to international polo was when South Africa became a republic in 1960, and sanctions from all international sporting bodies ensured that they never had the opportunity to play anything but inter-provincial sports until apartheid was lifted. This was only in 1994. So people like Dad, all our uncles from his generation, and cousins of my own age missed out on tours to play countries overseas, or against any visitors who would normally come over to play against the renowned Springboks. All about polo and the history which involved my family. And I just want to thank John Moslane for being my sound engineer and enabling me to make these videos. I'd like you to visit my website, www.whitezulubook.com, and I'd like to thank you for being my support, for giving me such really complimentary messages, and for listening to my vlogs, as they call them now, apparently. And there's another one coming soon enough. So I hope you enjoyed that one. It was slightly different, but polo played such a huge part in my younger life that I had to give you a little bit of the background, which involved a whole lot of my relations. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.